So hello, welcome to this webinar organized by Pangaea. I'm Dana Ransby, and I'm Pangaea's data editor at Alfred Wegener Institute in Bremerhaven. And I took over the responsibilities of data management for MOSAIC project in Pangaea. And so I'm your contact person when it comes to data publication with us. And you will surely also cooperate with my other colleagues, which I introduce at the end of the presentation. And the topics that I'm going to cover during the next about 60 minutes are following. So why are you asked to publish your MOSAIC data? And what is a data publication at all? So today we're not going to talk about publishing scientific papers, but about publishing data sets. When and where you should ideally publish your MOSAIC data. And in a long section in the second part of my presentation, I will devote to data publication process in our repository in Pangaea in detail. So data management in MOSAIC project is a part of the O2A concept of Alfred Wegener Institute. We call it observation to analysis, O2A. And this is a concept that's been developed over the recent years. And in a way, MOSAIC is a really large user case for us, in which many new features are being developed. And for the first time, we have a great number of external participants joining in that we need to grant access to these services to. So, of course, for us at the computing center, for our team, it means lots of workflow adjustments, and also it means for us lots of opportunities. And at any stage of your interaction with O2A, we very much welcome your feedback to all the components and also to the documentation. So we'll be really grateful for that. And for that, for contacting us and members of our team responsible for different parts of the O2A, we have a generic contact address, support@mosaicdata.org. Another for you maybe graphically more familiar scheme of the O2A concept is this one that's been presented by my colleague Antonia Immers on many occasions before and during the expedition. So I'll go through the individual parts. So in the beginning, we have a sensor which produces data. Now the metadata management of the sensors is done through the sensor at avi.com, so where we store all kinds of metadata related to the measurement device. This has been done already before the expedition and during the expedition. In the next step, another component, the ship action log, is used during the expedition on the ship. And this interacts with the sensor. This is where the actual measurement actions are recorded and the IDs are created. So when this is done, the raw data we move through the automatic process through the ingest procedure. And in case of MOSAIC, the data storage is referred to as MCS, MOSAIC Central Storage. And that contains areas of raw data, which we call platforms, and process data workspace. Because MCS is not a permanent storage, we then move on. I will skip these other components of data monitoring and analysis to data archiving. So as the primary data need to be published by the PIs and authors to Pangaea, which is the primary data repository, or other repositories which have agreements with MOSAIC management. So the last data publication part here will be the main focus of the presentation today. So what is actually and what isn't data publication, and why and when should we publish the MOSAIC data? So this workflow will probably sound familiar to you. So this is where the MOSAIC data are created during the expedition, and through the cooperation in your scientific team's research, you create the paper draft. In case of the MOSAIC project, this paper draft should be submitted to the project board, where maybe some pending authorship issues might be resolved. And also it's checked whether this paper draft contains proper project attribution and data attribution. And then the process is, let's say, standard. The paper can be submitted and undergoes peer review, which usually takes considerable amount of time. And after the paper is, after that, the paper is revised and can, in ideal case, is published. So then we end up with a paper publication, which is citable, and it contains a DOI. I will be talking about DOI today a lot. So DOI means the digital object identifier, and it is a persistent identifier, a link, which is persistent and will always take you to this published research, to this piece of publication. So in MOSAIC, we put lots of focus on the publication of the data. So actually, we urge you to publish the data before the paper publication, so that the two entities can be interlinked and on a metadata level. So let's see how we would like to see the data publication workflow to happen in ideal case for MOSAIC project, which will also follow the FAIR data principles. So ideally, already before you submit your paper draft to be checked in the project board, and you send your data for peer review, the data submission to a repository should already happen. In our repository in Pangaea, the data curation needs some time. It's lots of manual work, and so we cannot grant you with the publication, with the citation of the data right away. It usually takes quite a bit of time. And so ideally, the citable MOSAIC data should be already included in the paper draft, which is, and then the paper goes through the peer review. In many journals, it is actually compulsory that the data accompanying the study are also available to the reviewers, which is a very sensible approach. And so it is also very compatible with this approach we have for MOSAIC data publication. So the data sets that are stored with Pangaea can have a password protection, and we can create access link for the reviewers or for anyone who needs the access, and that's why you don't have to be worried about publishing your data before your publication or your manuscript is out. But at the same time, we can then guarantee that the cross-referencing between the manuscript and the data set can be done at the end. When you get your proofs, you can add the final citation of the data set to the manuscript references. So this doesn't mean that data sets need to always be connected to a paper. It is also possible, of course, to publish data as a standalone entity. It doesn't have to be in connection with a paper. I will be talking a lot about metadata today, so I just explain what I mean by that. So metadata are basically data describing your data. We are interested in what was measured, which is in our repository characterized by parameters and units. Who is behind the data? So these are contributors, authors, PIs, and also publications related to the data, maybe references of the methods and paper related to the data, previous research, or maybe data sets that this study is building up onto. Where? So all data from MOSAIC project come from somewhere on the Earth. So we describe this by georeferencing, latitude, longitude, and ideally we are also interested in the third dimension, depth in ice or water or sediment, or if it was in the atmosphere, altitude. When? That means date and time stamp, or age when it comes to, for example, sediment cores or ice cores. And how? By these metadata, we can describe the methods and devices by which the data were generated. So, and all in all, these metadata are contributing massively to the fairness and especially towards the interoperability and reusability of the data. So fair data principles for data publication is a concept you've probably heard of and are familiar with. It's become a standard that many institutions and funding agencies aim for. And it's also the case for the MOSAIC project and is features in the data policy. So what is and what isn't published data? Another look at it is it's clear that published data isn't a USB stick or hard drive. It definitely isn't a statement in the paper. Data used for this manuscript were uploaded to Pangaea or some other repository and will be available soon. So these are not published data. There is also often a slight confusion. Also, the data that you share within the MOSAIC project on the MOSAIC Central Storage, MCS, or another public server are not published data. For example, not citable, they are not interoperable or reusable, whereas they are, for example, accessible and findable, at least for your community. Also, supplement to a published paper cannot be considered published data because it is not interoperable and reusable, although it can be easily found. So basically, published data are data published with accredited data repositories, like those associated with MOSAIC project, Pangaea, BODC, Arctic Data Center, ARM. And in these repositories, we can actually guarantee that these data are findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. So a published data set, in addition to that, is equipped with a complete set of metadata, and it is fully citable. So that means, like a published paper, it has a title, it has authors, abstract, and it is a persistent identifier, DOI, in our case. It can or doesn't have to have a reference to a scientific paper publication. And the correct citation follows the scheme: authors, year, title, then the repository, and at the end, the DOI. So not only DOIs, which we sometimes see in data availability sections of papers. It should also data sets must be cited by the full citation, with the example I pasted here from one data set published in Pangaea. So authors, year, title, and DOI. So of course the presented workflow requires an extra planning step for the PIs and authors, submitting the data in time, but it also has benefits for the authors in the form of visibility. In previous studies on this topic, it was shown that papers which have data accessible, or open access data, receive more citations. Also, when underlying data are accessible, then the research is reproducible, which adds the credibility of the research, and improved accessibility by scientific community. So it improves your scientific exchange. Also, publishing data independently on the paper publications has some more side effects. For example, you can distinguish between the data authors and the paper authors. So including the authors of the data itself in the citation, or in the authors of the data sets, allows acknowledging contributions of the scientists, technicians, or students who generated the data during the field campaign or during the processing stage of the data, but did not contribute significantly to the interpretation and manuscript writing and wouldn't make it on the list of the paper authors. So this is actually a very good opportunity. So very generally said, we often get the question, who is the author of the data set? So in no way it means that the data set authors must be the same as the paper authors. Authors of the data sets are those who contributed to collection and processing of the data. And of course, generally, those who decide on the authorship should follow the general rules of good scientific practice. In Germany, we have guidelines for safeguarding good research practice issued by German Scientific Foundation. In other countries, there are surely similar documents. And next, I'd like to mention the underlying document for the MOSAIC data management, MOSAIC Data Policy. So here I would like just to tell you it exists if you're not aware of that. But those who joined the expedition, you're surely aware of that because you had to read it and sign it. So also you who who didn't join the expedition but plan to join the early access to data to MOSAIC Consortium, please read the data policy. Everyone who wants to access the data on MCS has to do that. So the document regulates the data access, data release, authorship, and acknowledgements. It defines certain dates when the data needs to be released on the MCS or by other means to the MOSAIC consortium. But most importantly, it defines the public release date by 1st of January 2023. So this is the date by which, according to this agreement, all MOSAIC data should be publicly available. So this is to be keep in mind. And where can you publish the MOSAIC data? We have a look at the list of repositories where Pangaea stands on the top, because Pangaea is the primary repository associated with the MOSAIC project for both raw and primary data. But the data policy allows exceptions. So we have several repositories with which MOSAIC project board signed an agreement So these are all certified and approved repositories who can guarantee fair principles. The reason we have them on board is that some national funding bodies only accept publication of data in repositories in the country that provided the funding. They have these strict rules, and so this is of course possible. So we have, for example, for American scientists, Arctic Data Center, and for Department of Energy funded scientists, there is a repository, Atmospheric Radiation Measurement Data Center, which has that had already basically own data management infrastructure within the MOSAIC project, quite independent of the rest of the infrastructure. And there are another 3 British repositories for British funded scientists. So if you find yourself in a position when your national funding agency doesn't allow you to publish data with one of these repositories, you still please contact us and we can try to organize a similar agreement with your repository. Now I will talk more in detail about Pangaea. I would like to introduce Pangaea as a repository. So the website of Pangaea is pangaea.de. We are an open access repository, primarily focused on geoscientific and environmental data. The repository is co-hosted by Alfred Wegener Institute and by MARUM, Center for Marine Environmental Sciences at the University of Bremen. The data in Pangaea are stored in a relational database, and as I mentioned, they are georeferenced in time and space. We provide dataset citations, including persistent identifier, DOI. And of course, with this, we guarantee long-term accessibility of the data, and the data are published according to FAIR principles, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, both for machines and for humans. So Pangaea provides full curation service, which involves lots of editor intervention. We collect and curate metadata, synchronize data and metadata with existing data sets, and make collections and so on. So submission of data and metadata happens by authors via our ticket system from the website and clicking the submit button. And after you send your data to us, the curator that is responsible for your data submission basically guides and leads you throughout the publishing process. After importing the data to our database, we basically prepare a proof for you. We send you a link, which you are then asked to proofread and approve. And after that, only the data can be published. So we offer the possibility on password protection or moratorium on the access. For a MOSAIC project, as I mentioned just some minutes ago, the date for public release is 1st of January 2023. So until then, you can choose, or the PIs can choose to have the data in Pangaea password protected. That means that only metadata from the data set are findable and visible in Pangaea, but the data itself cannot be downloaded. But on the other hand, for the purposes of peer review, we can provide you with an access for reviewers of the papers or other colleagues that you want to share your data with before the moratorium expires. So in Pangaea, we also publish different levels of data, raw data or calibrated data, primary data basically. So I will talk a bit about both kinds of data, and the individual data sets, if they are of the same kind, belong clearly together, don't make sense individually, can be joined into so-called data collections. And all these levels are then interlinked, as well as we can create references and links to journal papers, as I mentioned. Now I'll lead you through some screenshots and browser views of datasets published with Pangaea. So here is a recently published paper in the MOSAIC project. This is a web view of the recently published paper on sea ice from measurements of buoy, ice buoy, or snow buoy, sorry. So this is basically a meta header. So on the top, you see the citation with the names of the authors, title of the data set, Pangaea, and the DOI. So this is not the final DOI. In this case, the data set is still the registration of the DOI didn't happen, but it can happen very soon. So basically, the DOI Pangaea DE will be replaced by pangaea.org, but the rest of the DOI won't change anymore. For easy way of citing any data set from Pangaea, under the citation, we have citation and sharing tools where you can export the citations in different formats, and you can also share these on social media. We have a possibility to any data set to to add a document, a PDF or a text document, further describing the data. So all kinds of descriptions that did not fit into any of our metadata categories can be added as such document. So this is not, of course, not machine readable, but it can definitely improve the human understandability of the data. So for this particular document, we have here, for example, the buoy deployment report that can further explain what the data contains and how they were acquired. Then we have a list of projects that the dataset is related to. One of them is, of course, MOSAIC. So when you click on this link, open a window where detailed information about the project is provided, including the funder and the grant number, the AVI_PS122_00. So by this, we acknowledge the MOSAIC project in all publications in our repository. Then when you scroll down through this meta header, there are further fields. The field event, this is basically a description of the sampling or measurement instance with georeferencing, latitude, longitude, date and time. Also, it creates a link to the expedition or to the leg and to the methods. So for example, here I open the information about the campaign. So this data set or this buoy was released during the academic Fedorov cruise in the beginning of the MOSAIC expedition. And here in the event information or metadata, we also have this link to sensor, AVI sensor, which I am opening the data set in the browser now, and the event link to the sensor, which takes us to the sensor AVI system that I mentioned in the beginning of the presentation, in which we can find much more detailed metadata to this buoy than we are able to fit into Pangaea and our data model. So here we have information about the sensor itself, its description, and all the fields that you are probably more familiar with than me, because you all or many of you were editing in Sensor Avi your own sensors. So there are also persons related to this buoy having different roles. There is a list of actions logged with this sensor. So this was a buoy which was released once and then ended its life, but many sensors are reused many times during the expedition and during multiple expeditions. So this field is, this table is much more complete for those. Then also parameters and units that are measured by this sensor, and further resources. I find this interesting that you can have yet more documents, fact sheets, and manuals, and so on. So I'll go now back to the presentation. And when we scroll down in the data set, I'll go to the live data set. It's probably better. We have at the end of the meta header the list of parameters that describe the data table itself. So they are full names, short names, and units, as well as principal investigator, one per parameter, methods, and comments. Then we get to the license and data itself. So the data table can be either opened in the browser and explored like this, or it can be downloaded as a text file, which then in the text editor looks like this. It has the same, basically all the information from the meta header presented on the website is also contained here, and it continues with the data itself. So. Okay, here's another example showing a recently added data set from MOSAIC Cruise, which still is actually in review. So this data set can still be changed. Anything about the data and metadata can be still it doesn't have to be final. Typically, for data sets in review, we have moratorium on access, so only the authors can access this data set. And an interesting feature of this particular data set is that it's a data collection. So actually, there are several individual tables, like the one I showed you just now, joined into one collection, which can be then cited as one data publication. Either that or individually. Right, so generally for the MOSAIC project, we already have quite, then we have 26 data sets published until now. They can be found using the project label MOSAIC, or if you type MOSAIC 2019-2020, will arrive to the same data sets. And in Pangaea, you can then sort these data sets by authors, by other projects. You can see which data come from Academic Fedorov, which come from Polarstern, or in the future also, of course, other platforms from which leg of the MOSAIC, and so on. So this is the label that we use in Pangaea for MOSAIC data set. And now, in the rest of the presentation, I would like to more in detail discuss the data publication in our repository. So how you should prepare data for the submission in Pangaea. To make the process, let's say, smoother and to keep most control on the data, we'd like to consider several things to prepare the data so that we don't have to manipulate them too much to bring them into our relational database. So we don't often receive norm files like this, but there are still some hints that I would like to share with you to make the data archivation with us as smooth as possible. So I will talk about two different types of data. The typical case of data publication with us is text table, tabular limited text file, or basically a spreadsheet that we directly import into our relational database. And so these data can be submitted as such, as a tabular limited text file, or, for example, Excel spreadsheet. I mentioned that for most of the data acquired during MOSAIC, georeference should be available. So I would also like to ask you to always provide latitude and longitude, if available for each line in the data set, then do that, please. Also, the third dimension, like water depth or altitude or depth in ice or depth in water, should be an additional column if that's available for your data. We use the ISO format for date and time. And I will talk a little bit later about event, but it's basically a synonym for device operation ID in MOSAIC. And so if your data were acquired during multiple events, it's especially important that also for each line in your data set, you use the correct event label or data operation ID label. And then here, of course, in the header of your data set, there will be parameters. It should always be, they should always be accompanied by a unit. So otherwise we would have to guess and we would have to ask back. And so this will be easier if you provide it right away. Of course, you probably like using abbreviations, but we don't understand everything, so always abbreviations should be explained either directly in the data table or in an additional separate metadata table, which can be added to explain any metadata. So I will show you some example how such a submission can look like, how such a table can look like. So this would be an example of visual eyes observations during the academic Fedorov cruise. So in this spreadsheet, you see the header contains lots of abbreviations. So in such case, we would of course require that you add another table, which will explain each of these short parameter names or abbreviations that you use as a full parameter name so that we can understand it. Also including the unit. Then I've already mentioned that each of the parameters in your data set can have a different PI. So one PI per parameter is also a maximum. Plus, to make the data more interoperable, we also collect information about the method that you used, and each parameter can have a comment. So a data set that you submit like this after upload to Pangaea would look like this published data set. So this is special sea ice observation aboard academic Fedorov during the MOSAIC Leg 1. And So in this data set, we also have links to other publications which provide further details about the methodology of such ice observation, including the list to this, a link to these methodologies. And as you see, all parameters, long names, short names, PIs, and comments. And this is then the data table in the web view. It can be downloaded as a text file. The dataset can be downloaded as a text file. So this is the most common data type that we published in Pangaea. Of course, not data can be prepared as such a table with tab-separated values. But many data are provided in specific formats, binary files. So these can include, for example, shape files, netcdfs, images, films. And these we archive as links to files in Pangaea. When you have a submission like this, in addition to your files that you paste together with the submission form, we will also need additional metadata information. So if these data are related to more than one event or device operation ID, we will of course need the event which is related to each single of these files in the table. Then if you can specify this latitude and longitude related to this individual file, image maybe, and also date and time that it was collected when available in this resolution. So in addition, you can also provide a data description, a README file or a PDF file. And the file names should not contain any spaces and special symbols. And an example of what table like that could look like is here. So we would have, of course, have a column with the list of with the names of the files, and for each file you can add a description, what's in the file, simple text field, and those additional metadata I suggested if available. And when we publish a data set like this in Pangaea, it would look like this. So the metadata header with all the lists of events. So these are ROV camera video screenshots of frames from leg 2 of MOSAIC expedition. So they came from multiple ROV dives. So these dives are listed here. But in addition to that, we have here the data table with the links to the files. When these files are graphics, we can create a table like this with these thumbs. We can then add also a size of the file and a type and all the description that you provide us with. Okay, I'll go back to the presentation now. For each of the data sets published in Pangaea, of course, we would need a title from you. And if that data set you submitting is actually not a single table, but multiple tables, we will need titles for each of them. So if you publish data in connection to a paper, this title needs to be different from the title of the paper to prevent confusion. So please use label MOSAIC as project. If that data is connected to a paper in preparation, you can already, or you should already include the preliminary paper citation. For example, paper in review and an abstract. and files that would provide some extended documentation, like I mentioned, text file or PDFs, or it can be also links to EPIC or DOIs of the documentation published elsewhere. And we have, of course, a documentation at Pangaea, Pangaea Wiki, where we discuss all this in detail. So when you submit your data, you come to the pangaea.de website and click data submission. And if you're a first-time user, you are asked to register yourself and agree to the terms of use. The good thing is that you don't have to come up with your new, completely new login. You can use your ORCID identifier, Open Researcher and Contributor ID, for logging to Pangaea, and use this as your logging access. So actually, this is a screenshot what the data submission form looks like. We have a new submission interface coming soon, so I will already show you some mockups from that, what the submission form looks like. So we will ask you for a title, what was measured, where and when, simply. Then you can add one or several authors, keywords, and an abstract. This abstract should, in detail, discuss again what, where, when, and how, and why was measured. And in this abstract, we ask you to avoid interpreting the results, because this is actually not an information that belongs to a data set. It's something that should be a part of manuscript. In the next field, you agree to a license. You can specify you want a moratorium on access. And you can name any references that are mentioned in the data table itself or in the abstract that we add as references to the to your paper. Here, label MOSAIC. You can add information about the funding from different sources than MOSAIC, in addition to that. And most importantly, here you can drag and drop your files. If the files are more than 100 megabyte or there are more than 20 individual files, you just go back and write a message to us here. Please provide a upload link, and that's what our editorial office will do for you. Okay, I promised that I will talk a little bit more about the events or the device operation IDs. So here we go. So for logging scientific work during MOSAIC field work, the dship log was used, and in that science activities were a collection of device operations. Typically, these were during 1 week. And the device operations, they are the actual individual measurements or sampling actions of your devices. And device operation in this dship log comprises of one or several actions. So these can be typically deployment, they can be profile start, station start, profile end, or simply information. And then during this log, the device operation ID is created in the dship, comprising of the campaign title, so PS 122 / expedition leg, so 125, for example, an underscore, and science activity, that weekly chunk, and then hyphen, and number of device operation within the science activity. And in this dship log, this a device operation is also linked to a specific sensor in sensor meta information system. So how does device operation ID is reflected in Pangaea? So device operation ID, this label is actually exactly the same for MOSAIC project in Pangaea as what we call event. So we reuse these device operation IDs as they are. We only call them differently for historical reasons. We always call these things events, but it is the same thing. So device operation ID logged during MOSAIC expedition is event in Pangaea. The only difference is the information in Pangaea is not, so the events in Pangaea are not subdivided into actions. So our list is a simplified list or consolidated list. We only have maximum two actions, let's say, for each event. So it can be start or end or just start. But we don't have all the information in between, like deployed information and this. So our list is somewhat consolidated in comparison to the device operation IDs. So I asked you to use the correct device operation IDs when you're submitting your data to Pangaea. How you can do that? You can use the lists we have already uploaded to Pangaea for all MOSAIC legs. So if you go to Pangaea website and scroll all the way down to expeditions, we have these lists for many German research vessels, but we also have a direct link to MOSAIC expedition from this site, where we have a list of campaigns that are related to MOSAIC. So these are Polarstern campaigns, but also today, I think, completely fresh Polar 5 airplane, research plane was added. We also have the academic Fedorov campaign here. And so for each of these campaigns, you can click at event list, which provides you with a list of events or device operation IDs, which can be either read on the web browser or downloaded as tab delimited text, and you can use it for your purposes for preparing the data for publication. So it's this device operation ID and event has a very important function for linking your data with the sensor metadata and other metadata. So it's really quite crucial that you use the right labels. Now, of course, you might be aware of the fact that after the expedition, after the end of the leg, the D-ship log cannot be altered. But this is not so strict in Pangaea. We still can correct mistakes, and we can also add things like, for example, missing end of event to this list. So if you find a mistake, please contact us via info@pangaea.de or via our contact form, and we will make these adjustments. If this change is relevant for more than one event, for example, for all of your sensor, for all events related to your sensor, please go to this link where there are instructions and a correction sheet, which you can fill in what changes need to be implemented, and again submit it to Pangaea with some explanation what we're supposed to do. And we will take care of the change not only in Pangaea but also in sensor web at the same time. And finally, I would like to talk briefly about raw data publishing in Pangaea. So this raw data publication isn't something that you need to do by the PIs and authors don't have to submit the data via a submission form, just like the primary data. This is actually something that happens semi-automatically. So for that, we cooperate, or this service is provided by the colleagues from the Data Logistics Support Group, and these they're using metadata from the sensor AVI DE for preparing these data transfers to Pangaea. So basically, after a data set is being transferred to the final storage, and we have the information about it in Pangaea, the responsible PIs will be informed about the raw data publication. They will be sent the proof links and asked for their approval. Also, at this stage, we will be very interested to hear if we got the authors right, because it's very difficult to extract this information simply from sensor AVI, because for each sensor there are different roles, and we really, because we're not aware which persons were were involved in creating these data. So this is really important that we get input from the PIs, so that in order for us to be able to get in touch with the PIs, we urge you, if you are a sensor PI, if you didn't do that yet, please create a Pangaea account. It's really easy. You can do it with your ORCID. And like that, we'll be able to simply contact you via our tracking ticket system and communicate with you about the raw data publication. So if the raw data wasn't published in Pangaea yet at the time when you submit your primary data for publication, and you need it for these two versions to be interconnected, please contact us, and we can speed up the publication of your of the particular sensor that you're interested in. And also, during the data publication, please instruct us to create links to other versions of your data, for example, raw data or data published in another repository. So this is all possible. We just need to know about that. And in order to be able to archive your data in a semi-automatic manner and also in a timely manner, we need your input. So recently, the emails were sent to you, to MOSAIC community, with a request for data description. So this means that each relevant file in the MCS raw data must be described. So we have a web page for this at Spaces that contains the information what we need you to describe. Basically, a link to detailed description can be shared with us if you upload such a documentation to EPIC. In case you are using some non-standard raw files in some maybe proprietary software, so that the published raw data are of any use to anybody at all, we really need to publish such a documentation together with this. So, and the directory and file structure description in the platforms of the MCS should be uploaded to the sensor. And here the information we need is under which path on the MCS are the file stores, which are the relevant files on the data storage, what is the naming scheme, with prefix, postfix, timestamp, and data type, and also if all of these data need to be published, or are there any data which are maybe redundant or different, or maybe old version and should not be published as raw data in Pangaea. So we need this kind of information from you to be delivered through the sensor AVI. So I think I would like to one more time kind of reiterate the whole process of the data publication within the MOSAIC project. To sum up, so the raw and primary data from the board MCS are stored on the MCS on land. So this has happened by now, and these data, by their structure, are also interconnected to the metadata in sensor. So these data on MCS are now available to you as a MOSAIC community to work on and to cooperate. What happens in a semi-automatic way is the storage and final storage and archivation of the raw data to long-term archive. So with this, after the PI's approval, the data set becomes public. So it'll be published on Pangaea with the full citation and DOI. Can still be kept under password protection. And the primary data that you obtain by calibration, by combining different sensors and data, they will always have to be submitted to Pangaea or other repository by the researchers themselves. So this publication needs to be initiated by you directly via our ticket system to Pangaea. This data, again, will be published with us with a full citation and the DOI. Different versions of the data, or different processing levels of the data should be interconnected, should be cross-referenced, and if that doesn't happen, if it didn't happen yet, we need to your input about this. You need to tell us that if you submit primary data, that there should be raw data connected to this, and so this interconnection needs to be created. And I remind you the date of 2023. This is the date when all MOSAIC data should be publicly available, also outside of the MOSAIC community. So there are also certain data types that did not flow to the this MCS directly. So these are some exceptions. For example, buoy data, which did not travel towards the MCS, but were instead published at MARE-ICE portal, or the DOE ARM data, which also haven't been stored to MCS, but we also aim to, for these sensors, to make an information available in the respective folders where these data can be found. So this information, so where these data are also published finally, so that all the data can then be properly cited in your impactful publications. So this is basically nearing the end of the presentation. Here are the faces of the Pangaea's data management team for MOSAIC. I wrote Marianne's name in small because she's been working on MOSAIC metadata, but she already left our team, so she's no longer there. But all the others you likely meet during your interaction with us during your data publishing. You can access Pangaea via pangaea.de, and you can contact either me personally or our team via info@pangaea.de. And the information about data publication is available at this link. So in MOSAIC data flow, you can not only rely on Pangaea, but also issues that are not related to data publication in our repository. You will receive support from AVI Computing Center team. So the data services can be accessed at mosaicdata.org, and the email address that is your contact point for the support is support@mosaicdata.org, and my colleagues and this your request will be delivered to the relevant colleagues. So with this, I'd like to close the presentation part and open the discussion. You're welcome to ask questions.
Yeah. So thanks, Dana. I think for the questions, so you can either put in questions in the chat that is open, then we will try. And the other possibility is, or in general, when you have a question, I think it's kind if you switch on, it's possible to switch on your camera, so we get first an idea who has a question, and we will then ask you one by one. And it's also nice to have to see some faces when answering. I think it's for Dana especially nice. Okay, so is there a first question? We don't have questions in the chat. Something related to how to get your data in, Alexander?
So can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So I had already a call today with Amelie about this Pangaea upload of data, and there was a mail around, I have to lie, maybe around the 14th of October, just days before we were back at Bremerhaven with Polarstern, with the request to upload the meta description data for the raw data upload as soon as possible by the 14th of October. So, and now we have already one month later, and the question is now, how much time do I have as PI for my data, what I uploaded to MCS during like 4 and 5 to put the metadata description now? Because all the deadline is over.
Right. Is Max present? I thought I saw Max's name because he would be the person. Maximilian, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Would you like to answer the question?
Well, we stated there a deadline in our mail, so we can follow up let's say the responses from you and check if we really have received a data description file. This does not mean that we immediately start publishing your data or processing it, but we are now able to understand if we have a data description to understand which data we have on the MCS stored. And how we can, well, further proceed to, let's say, move this to a Pangaea data submission.
Maybe I will add something. So in generally, yes, we had been aware that the deadline was rather close, but on the other hand, you know, when you're giving people too much time, they forget about it. It's at least what happens also to me. So we kindly ask to do this as soon as possible. The reason why we need to just, maybe it's also not completely clear. So what we're aiming for is to have a kind of, at least for the raw data that had been already stored and also structured automatically. So to have a kind of semi-automatic import and transfer of these data to Pangaea. So without you actually touching the files again, but already, and that's prepared by Max, basically routines to get them into the Pangaea systems. We still we make still small adjustments in the details to the workflow itself, because that's also a bit of new of us. However, it is already planned or meant that you will be notified indeed for any kind. So non-data will be just published and getting an open access without notifying the PI. For this little thing, we need to know who's the PI, or we need this information Max asked for. Because if we don't understand, we can't do any semi-automatic, and then it will be lying again on your shoulder to give us all the details. And I assume that's more work than provide this as Max requested. That's basically the background. This is enabling us additional service.
Yeah, absolutely clear for me and makes absolutely sense. And I would like to prepare it as soon as possible, but I need also some time for it. And I think it's also an iterative process, because I'm not sure that I put all the information in such a way in the metadata file or metadata description as you need it or you will need it. So maybe, and the time is running, the end of the year is coming, and I really see here the issue that it's tight to finish that until the end of November or something like that.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think the pressure is high on every one of us, because also of the high impact of MOSAIC in generally, also by the politics, by the public. That's the reason why we have a higher pressure than for some other projects. You know, when you're usually coming back from a cruise, no one cares for a year sometimes, even if you have your data together, but the pressure is quite high, and at least we should show that MOSAIC, the community MOSAIC, is keeping the promises they actually put out there with all the great data and all the stuff. And again, it doesn't mean at all that they come out of your hands already in open access and you use them. It is really just helping. So we might also giving a feedback if this kind of deadlines start too short. It's also a feedback to all of us, and we will be thinking, but again, as soon as possible, because this is really the limit, and we should show something indeed in Pangaea, for instance, that something has happened since MOSAIC comes back. Polarstern has been back. That's easily to detect, easily showcase, just to show, oh, you see the list. You can't access the data, but you see the list of the data that are available. Yeah, it is as it is for any one of us.
Okay, fine. So it means yes, the pressure is simply there, but it's not necessary that I finish all the things yesterday.
It's
fine. That's the point. So then it's what I'd like to prepare during the next days. Okay, thank you very much.
I can see here one question that you probably cannot see, Janine, because it was sent to me only. So I will just read the question and answer it. Okay. Does anything you have described about the submission in Pangaea, both processed and raw, apply to those of us who must archive in Arctic Data Center, or do we need to get separate instructions from them about procedures and metadata requirements? As far as I understand, we will try not to do this automatic raw data archiving procedure for you. If you let us know which sensor we should not archive as raw data in Pangaea, but again, we have no idea. So we need feedback from you which sensors we should not publish as raw data. And otherwise, I think I cannot really speak for the Arctic Data Center. I suppose that they will probably provide you with separate instructions how you should structure your data publication. So we agreed on some metadata requirements in general, but the procedure how other data centers are going to handle your submissions really vary a lot. So I cannot really speak for other data centers.
Yeah, but we have someone at least for the Arctic Data Center. So Janet, you want to like to answer this question?
Yeah, I'll just chime in quickly. So we don't have an automatic system of the raw data like you described, but we would like to archive the raw data and the any process data and or scripts associated with those files to the Arctic Data Center. We have very similar metadata requirements to Pangaea, and we've discussed internally how those can line up. In terms of your specific case, I'd recommend emailing support at, I'm just typing this into the chat as I'm saying it, support at arcticdata.io, and we can talk more specifically about your data set and help you get it archived on the Arctic Data Center. I hope that answers the question.
Dana, can you maybe update your slides, and I don't know if you send them around, and maybe also include this email address so we have it there as well as an additional contact point.
Yes, we'll do that.
Then there are more questions in the chat. There's another one. Does the moratorium work also for the other repositories? I'm just putting this now earlier than the other question because it relates to it. It is the MOSAIC Data Policy, so the data all needs to be published in 2023. That should apply to everyone, as far as I know, because that's a data policy you have signed, all your institutions have signed. Or are there exceptions at the Arctic Data Center, Janet?
For the Arctic Data Center, it depends on your specific NSF grant. So most NSF grant requires publication within 2 years of collection or before the end of the award, whichever comes first. There are a couple different programs within NSF, so there may be some slight variation there, but in general, that's what the timeline requirements are. Before that time, yes, there's a possibility for a moratorium up until you get to that point.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, all need to become an open access because that was promised and signed and agreed. So then I'm going up to the question starting from one from Marcel. How do we store the XY coordinates in meters on the flow, simply as an extra column?
Yes, that's correct.
Sometimes we have easy questions. So, is there any software tools or guidelines documented to check metadata formats and fields complain? Or is it left to the data curators?
It is left to data curators. We have some tools internally. We do a little bit of handwork, manual work, but it's mostly up to us. So try to do it as well as possible, but we check that. And if anything is missing, we are contacting you back and we ask for the missing metadata.
That's the difference to other data center, not the Arctic ones, but like if you think about Fixture also, we always have people in place like Dana who cross-checking again the submission, guiding the users through the submission process and so on. Several data center have this, but not everyone that's out there and is storing data. Is the raw data public after publication, or does it automatically go under moratorium until 2023?
So we automatically set the moratorium, but of course the PIs have the option to opt out of the moratorium and make the data open access earlier.
Yeah. So to have it earlier public is never a problem. The other questions Janet has already answered, like there is also a moratorium at the Arctic Data Center and also for the other data center, this should also work. How do I start a publication of primary data? Do I write an email? No, but Dana will tell you or show you again how to do it.
So you come to pangaea.de. I hope you can still see my screenshot. You go to submit data and submit your data. Then you can log in to the account. I'm already logged in. If you do not have an account with Pangaea yet, you can register either with your email address or directly with your ORCID, and that leads you to a submission form. So this is how you do that. We prefer that to sending an email, because we have in the submission form the individual fields for the metadata already prepared, and in the new submission form, this will be even better structured. So please do it via Pangaea website.
Yeah, and we don't prefer it's the only way to submit data. It's not a preferable thing because it's simple, a matter of organization. It's also traceable, and just to make, and also the raw data will end up in the same system. So we're cross-linking them, so everything will run via what we call a ticket system. Is something you know from Amazon to actually follow up your order. You always can see it, and it's basically the same system as we said. The surface will change a bit, but there's everything in one place. And I think Dana has also mentioned it. Also for the raw data publication already, would be really helpful if every one of you gets a Pangaea account, because then we have already your contact information and can write you messages or inform you directly without again making some loops around. We can't do the registration for yourself, and Pangaea is a self-standing, so we are data publisher for Earth and Environmental Science. Even we are closely related to the ARWI, or actually hosted by the ARWI and the MARUM. We still have our own systems running. So you need to have your own login. And again, all data you're uploading is just accessible and visible for yourself, and you don't see the data of the other people or something like this. And we have several data submissions a day, so we need to have it organized this way. So don't send emails to Dana. That's will completely will make it not will make it hard to follow up. So we will leave all your data there, and then she comes back to you, maybe also with questions or with supports. That's not a problem at all. And just to make clear, if someone now have again noticed there's a message on that we have reduced service, yes, that's true. But MOSAIC is one of the exceptions that will be still processed with a very high priority.
Good. We have some more questions coming in to the chat. Is there any version control of data set? Say you find an error in your primary data you like to correct. How is that dealt with? Make a correction, associated files are changed, or does one need to create a new data set with new DOI or something else? So basically, if the error is in the data set itself, we create a new version of the data set, which replaces the old version. So that means that it gets a new separate DOI. But if there was already the old DOI used somewhere, people have it and use the link, it will take you through that old DOI to the new version of the data. So, and also the old version, which potentially might be wrong, is removed from. It's not visible, it's not findable at Pangaea, so it's kind of invisible, but the link still works. And we can also, for this old wrong version of the data, we can set password protections that it cannot be downloaded. So if there are only some small changes in metadata, let's say typo, that really don't make any change, we can adjust this without a new data publication.
Yes, and as long as the data set hasn't been in open access, or in other words, or I also don't have a registered DOI as not public, but still under the, we call it, well, the status is under review, it can be still made, you can still make any adjustment. There can be still made any adjustments if there's an error appears. But please be aware, we are not a working database, so you should be more than less certain that this is the final version, but obviously we don't want to have errors and mistakes in the system, so we correct them. And when we run a review, it's no problem at all. There will be also no new version, but we will just simply update the ones that's already there.
And for small changes in the data set, we also have a kind of history entry. So if just some small thing changes, we can make this history entry and explain briefly what changed. So if that really doesn't make any difference to possible for the interpretation, we can also do this, and it's documented on which day, which time, which change happened, and so this can be a very simple procedure. But it's also okay to make a new version of the data.
You see the chat. Should you want to answer the next question, Dana?
When using the data from ARM during MOSAIC and a value-added product is produced out of that data, does it need to be published in the ARM data repository too? Or is it up to the authors to choose the other repository like Pangaea? What would the pros and cons to choose one or the other repository be? So I think, I don't think that there is any restriction when you use data from one repository, process it, and correctly attribute the source of the data to then eventually publish it in a different repository. So I think there is nothing speaking against it. And that should also be related to the kind of license the data are published under. So you would have to check the license of ARM, but I would believe that that is possible. Is there anyone from ARM here today? No, I don't see anyone. So I would say it's possible. What would be pros and cons to choose one of or other repository. So so ARM and Pangaea have a very different kind of publication way of publishing data. So ARM is has kind of data streams, basically continuous data for over a long time, you basically select some of this data, part of the complete data set, and download it. Whereas in Pangaea, we really specialized on publishing these tabular data sets, so these tables I showed. So that would be probably a reason why you could go for us. I also don't know if ARM accepts publishing of these primary data in the same way and procedure like we do it in Pangaea. I cannot really speak for them. I don't know enough about that repository. Did I answer the question? Pablo says, okay, thank you. Mm-hmm.
Okay, any other questions? I haven't. MOSAIC is an example of transnational collaboration with different PIs on different decks. We need to split up data such that if an NSF PI must publish in ADC form on one leg, but PIs from the other countries publish on Pangaea. Good question.
It's a good question. Yeah, that would, of course, be a little bit unfortunate, I would say.
I think that there is no simple answer to it because we can't speak for the NSF either about their requirements. If they make exceptions, obviously it makes maybe content-wise no sense to split up data sets. So we might, so I think if you have this case, write a message and it will be discussed in the data board of
I think
the question, because the point is also maybe, I'm not sure if you can submit your data to NSF. That's not clear to me. I don't know if this is possible, for instance, but there should be a good scientifically well found, so that makes sense also scientifically how to organize this kind of data flows.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Janine. I think getting in touch with people from both repositories would be necessary in this case. And I think that one important criterion is which of the repositories is more suitable for that kind of data, I guess. So, but I'm sure that in cooperation with the other repository, we would arrive to some good solution. We've already had a case of a data set that should actually be published in another national repository according to the funding policy, but we agreed with that other data center that if we fulfill their requirements, they might make an exception for publication in Pangaea. So I think that that's always a matter of discussion and communication.
So overall, I think.
Yeah, speaking from the NSF side, from the Arctic Data Center side, I agree. Should just talk with the two of us and NSF to figure out what makes the most scientific sense.
I think overall, everyone's just aiming that the data doesn't get lost and get an open access somehow, getting that they are findable, and that's what we all working for. And it's not about one choosing over the others. It's really to find good ways for the scientists as well to make sure that the data are not getting lost in time and space overall.
And I think that the option of publishing the same kind of data over different repositories would be probably the worst option. So I think
we should not create artificial replicates just to satisfy any organizational requirements again, or just to make. But rather talk to us and we find a really good practical solution. Right. So Matt also said it's a danger to split artificially. No, that's what I think no one really wants. It's really, they should be useful, still the data afterwards. And maybe someone has to take a step back and we will for sure, just as long as it is sure that the data are published under certain criteria. That's also the reason why currently this data centers that had been selected as alternatives fulfill these requirements basically. Again, they should that we make sure that data can be reused afterwards. Doesn't matter where they are stored at the end of the day. Okay, so there are no more questions in the chat. So last possibility to switch on your camera to ask the question to any one of us. Doesn't look like. I think we also some people already leaving, so we also pretty good in time. So you want to say something at the end?
No, I'm happy that you appeared here, that you listened, and you had we had a nice discussion. So now you also know our faces, so don't hesitate to contact us whenever you have any further questions that might appear to you later. So thank you for coming.
Thanks.